everyone. Welcome back to the 11 Plus Exam Success Podcast. I'm your host, Ranjani Sundar, and I am joined by my co-host, Ken Thirukkumar. He has more than 20 years of experience teaching students for the 11 Plus exam and getting them successful results, and is also the founder of Exam Bytes Academy, the sponsor for this podcast. A couple of weeks ago, we talked more about private school exams and about what exactly the 11 Plus exam is. On this episode, we're going to be talking more about grammar schools and everything you need to know about them in advance of the application season starting again in 2025. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We know you want to hear more about grammar schools. We've been seeing lots of comments about that. Ken, can you start by telling us a little bit more about what grammar schools even are?
Grammar schools are selective state schools, so they run 11 plus, but they're funded by the government. And they are purely based on academic talent in the 11 plus, or your academic ability shown in the 11 plus. So they are focused, they are in line with the government curriculum.
Can you tell us a little bit more? So you said that they're kind of in line with the government curriculum and that they're more academically focused. So last week we talked more about how private school exams, how they kind of like have their own curriculum, they have their own focus on extracurriculars. Can you tell us a little bit more about the differences between private schools and grammar schools for the parents listening out there who want to know where they should apply to?
Private schools, as we talked about last week, are fee-paying schools where the parents have to pay the fees. In grammar schools, they are just an extension of state schools. So your normal schools that you probably live nearby, those schools are state-funded schools. They're paid for by taxpayers. Grammar schools are also, therefore, paid for by taxpayers. The only difference is normal state schools are not selective, so they don't run 11 plus. However, grammar schools can run the 11 plus, and therefore, like every other school that runs 11 plus, can afford to choose which children enter their schools. And because they allowed the choice, they often choose the children who will perform academically well. So academically quite high up in their cohort, and they rank them and then pick those children. So that's just the brief overall view, introduction to grammar schools versus private schools.
Just for the parents out there, we've heard of lots of very selective private schools like Seven Oaks, Eton College, City of London. Can you tell us about some grammar schools we probably have heard of?
It depends on where you are in the country. So if you're in around the London and Southeast area, you might have heard of the Kent grammar schools, the Dartford grammar schools. If you're in the Midlands, you might have heard of the King Edward grammar schools, so around Birmingham. North of England, Ripon Grammar School. And if you're near the southwest, you've got the Colleton, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Colleton Grammar School.
And can you tell us a little bit more about how exactly, what kind of, based on your experience, what kind of, whether a private school or a grammar school might be appropriate for a certain type of student?
Private schools are all about, specific values. So if you feel that what the government is teaching or what the government has mandated that children are taught doesn't really fit in with your values, private schools are the way to go. However, there is the balance of the fees. You are paying for that luxury to go into that system. However, on the other hand, if you feel, you don't really have a problem with with the way things are taught, but you would prefer your child to still be academically challenged in a different way, then you would go more towards grammar schools. So that's the key, reasoning behind private schools, whether you choose private schools or grammar schools. In reality, most parents often apply to both just to increase their chances.
You can apply to both. Definitely recommend applying to both. So as parents start this process, right now we're in this stage, at least now the time that we're recording it is the end of December. As 2025 starts, a lot of parents are starting to put their child in preparation programs and tutoring, but this is also a really great time for parents to really start researching which schools align with their values and which schools they want to start applying to. So let's jump into the application process for grammar schools. Can you tell us kind of like when people should start putting together their final list for grammar schools and what that process looks like?
So, of course, you start registration, or registration opens in the summer term of year five. So, we're going to work backwards. Okay. To answer that question, it's really, really important that we work backwards. So, registration, uh, registration opens and closes in the summer term of year five. So, right before the summer holidays. And it's a very, very tight band, very, very tight amount of time. So probably most often June to July. That's it. So don't miss that registration deadline. And if that's the very last time you want to finalize, I would say that's quite late. So you should be finalizing around May, maybe even April would be better, because then you can really consider what you want to do, talk to your child, explore a few more options just to be safe. Because at the end of the day, this is where your child is going to go and spend 7 years of their life. And it will have repercussions post that as well. Going to university and everything else will start with secondary school. So don't leave it too late. May, April's better, March is even better.
This, like the period you're talking about, the period of
Yep.
registration you need to be on top of is the summer holidays right after year five. That like after your child has finished year five, June to July.
So just a clarification there. Children, yes, but they often tend to go into June anyway. So school might not be finished. So in amongst all of that, it might be very difficult for parents, but please don't lose track of that. Make sure you are following those dates depending on where you live.
And can you tell us a little bit more? You were starting to say that parents should start way earlier. They shouldn't start looking for these schools in June
No,
and July.
no, absolutely not. Please, please don't do that. It's very much a hassle, but also a rush if you're doing that. So, if you are one of those parents who've just discovered the 11 plus at the end of December currently, and you are looking to see which schools would fit you and your child, I would start. Obviously, this is Christmas, so schools probably won't be open right now. But come January, call up schools, see if you can arrange private visits, see if you can arrange open days, attend those open days, talk to alumni, talk to people who may have gone to those schools, you might know, and perhaps if they didn't go to that school but still applied to it or got in, you can discuss maybe why they didn't want to go there. Perhaps it was distance, perhaps it was particular value that you aligned on. So those are all sorts of things that you need to be evaluating if your child is in year five right now, so that they can go, when you go into the spring term, you can attend those open days and find out more details that are relevant to you.
So just as some action steps parents should be taking right now, if your child is in year five, now is the time to start taking action. Now is the time to start calling after the holidays, start calling up the schools that you even have a remote interest in and start scheduling open days for you and your child to attend. We have a really great blog article actually on open days and how you can involve your child. So we'll definitely link that in the bio and the description below. Can you tell us more about what happens after registration occurs? When do the students take the exams? When do they hear back?
You take the exams from September all the way to October. You hear back round about March. So there is a significant wait between when you take the exams and when you hear back. Some schools, if they're doing multi-stage exams, and we've talked about this before, if they're multiple stages, you will hear back earlier if they've got past a particular stage. And some schools are now, because they want to relieve the stress, some particular schools, the ones that are really, really competitive, are starting to inform parents a lot earlier. Come, November, December, they'll let you know so that you can make adequate preparation, so you're not, waiting over the Christmas holidays worrying whether you got in or not. But for the most part, I would say March is when you would hear back, but you take the exams September to October.
Got it. Okay. And let's say, I'm in the registration process. So now we have an understanding of what the whole process looks like, right? Now I'm particularly interested in understanding for the parents who are listening, how many grammar schools should parents be applying to? Is there a limit?
There isn't a universal limit, but we wouldn't recommend any more than 4 to 6, just because you don't want to overwhelm your child, but also they might be too far apart.
Yeah, let's hear more about that. What kind of like things that you should consider? Location is one that you mentioned. Let's talk more about
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. So location, for reasons because of commute, you don't want to be your child traveling, 2 hours to get to their school. But on top of that, there's also the academic performance of the school. So whether, their performance in league tables, their Ofsted rankings. So that's a significant concern for parents. Because this is a state-funded school, not all state-funded schools are funded equally. So that is something you need to weigh up when you're considering grammar schools. The third is the ethos of the school, so their values and their culture. What do they stand for? What do they believe in? What do they prioritize? And finally, the facilities of the school. Just like, as I mentioned, not all schools are funded equally when it comes to government and state funded schools. Not all opportunities are available at every grammar school. So it needs to align with what your child is interested in or may be interested in. And again, that's where the open days come in handy.
That definitely makes sense. Is that the primary proxy you use as like an educator who's been in this field for a long time? When you're advising parents about how well the school is funded, is that public information that they can look up, or is it primarily through like proxying what kind of opportunities they give the students, what kind of facilities they have?
For the most part, it is publicly available, but it's not always transparent, unfortunately. So, if you want a better transparent idea of how it's funded, it's better to see where the money is going to, right? So if you go to a school and you don't see certain facilities that you've seen in other grammar schools, then perhaps you may be wondering, okay, where is this? Where are the priorities lying? That's something it's important to consider.
100%. That's a really good point that I think is really unique to and speaks to the years of experience that you have guiding the students through this process. Speaking of like, your experience and extensive knowledge in this field, how have you seen parents succeed in managing the organization of how they rank these schools and just deciding which schools they like and keeping track of that?
I mean that it's a very stressful thing to keep track of everything, because just because you're looking at 6 schools or applying to 6 schools doesn't mean you only look at 6 schools, right? You might end up looking at 15, 20 schools. How do you keep track of everything? A lot of parents have resorted to writing things down or a spreadsheet, and to aid in that, we do have our own spreadsheet. So we will be linking that in our comments below, or in a description below rather. It's very similar to our private school spreadsheet. You can keep track of everything, facilities, and the distance, open days, assessment dates, everything. So do check that out.
Definitely. We will definitely be linking that. Can you also give some practical advice to the parents listening on how to find out which grammar schools are near them?
Yes, absolutely. So there is the National Grammar Schools Association website, which again we will be linking. And you can go on there and select your county, and it will list all of the grammar schools within that county, which is a really, really good resource because you don't need to go on Google and search which grammar schools are near me, because Google doesn't always list everything that is near you, right? So it's better to go to this website, and it's always updated, so you can go there and check. Number two, I would say you can make sure that you regularly check the school websites for updates, because dates are always subject to change. So just because it was a particular date one year doesn't mean it's going to be the same date the next year.
Totally makes sense. So what I'm hearing, just to make sure everybody hears that, we will be linking the a link to a place where you can find all of the grammar schools near you in a certain radius, and also highly recommend that you keep tabs on the grammar schools that you're interested in to make sure that their dates are not changing from the last year, and just to make sure that you're not missing any of these important deadlines. Let's talk a little bit more now, switching gears, about what kind of financial considerations parents should have when they're considering these state-funded grammar schools.
Yeah, so compared to private schools, it's not going to be as high, mainly because there are no fees to pay, because it's funded by the state, by the government. However, there are still some fees, as with any other school. Uniforms, which are specific to the school, can be costly, but you don't really have a choice in it, unfortunately, because in the UK, we all have to wear school uniforms. Then there is commuting. So if the school is particularly far away, they might have to take a train, which again can increase costs. And finally, extracurricular activities. So these are the three things that often, parents have to consider when it comes to costs at grammar schools. So that's uniforms, extracurricular activities, and commuting.
With private schools, we spend a good deal of time talking about the different scholarships and bursaries available. Is there something similar or needed for grammar schools?
Unfortunately, because it's a state-funded school, they don't offer scholarships or bursaries. But there are, charities which offer certain grants and private scholarships that parents may be eligible for through third parties, but not through the school itself.
Got it. So overall, the grammar schools, like, you don't have to worry about the tuition. The tuition is pretty much covered. It's just that in some cases, if you're really struggling to provide the funds needed for the extracurriculars, or the uniforms or anything else associated with the cost of attending these
Mm-hmm.
schools, these third-party charities and grants can potentially lend a helping hand there. Let's jump a little bit to assessments. We this is an 11 plus exam podcast, so definitely want to hear your take on um, what kind of exams and what kind of questions students are likely to face when they're applying for grammar schools.
Yeah, so this is it says an 11 plus podcast. So there are three main things I would say look out for. One, it could be, there's the type of subject that's available that's being tested at the school rather. And this is all dependent on the board. So if you're new to exam boards, it's very simple. It's each 11 plus exam is run by a company. Now that can be CEM, so you may have heard of that, CEM, or GL. So those are the two main ones that run the 11 plus exams. And for CEM, they test verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, and maths with a bit of English sprinkled in. GL, on the other hand, tests all four. So both of these are multiple choice. But as always, there is a wild card, which is the school-specific exams. So some schools, they might add their own exams for stage two or perhaps for interviews if they choose to do so. Not all schools do, and that's where you have to check with the local county or local borough or the school itself, depending on how they conduct their 11 plus exams.
Got it. Very, very helpful. So, would you say general practice for the 11 plus exam, just reviewing all of the subjects, really focusing on the fundamentals, is that enough to kind of prepare a child effectively for these grammar school exams?
People often think, it's for, reviewing all four subjects as if it's a bad thing, even if it's only been, only if two things are being tested. It's absolutely not, because all four of these subjects have carryover between them. Right? Verbal reasoning helps English, non-verbal reasoning helps maths, and vice versa. And then if it's verbal reasoning, it helps non-verbal reasoning, so forth. So yes, absolutely. But you need to be hitting, 80, 90% in your practice when you're, in the summer holidays, right before the exams, in order to stand a good chance. Because remember, there is no entrance cost to take these exams. There's no, there is, anyone can take these exams as long as you're 11. So the bar for entry is quite low, and there's a lot more competition in these schools. So you have to be scoring a lot higher than you would do in private schools.
Got it. Totally, totally makes sense. So you mentioned students should be hitting that 80 to 90% success metric during their summer holidays before the exams really start to take place starting in September.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Extremely helpful. Can you tell us a little bit more? I know we talked a little bit about how the academics are usually really quite strong at grammar schools and are in line with the government curriculum. For students who maybe want to go beyond academics, but whose parents are able to provide the funds needed for grammar schools, but not necessarily private schools, what can these students expect? Will they still have access to sports, arts, music?
Yeah, absolutely. like I said, it's not always, it's, and this is the caveat, some schools are really, really well funded, depending on their borough, depending on the local state as well, local county. But they are still good schools. They are still going to be well funded, right? They will still have sports seats. In fact, private schools often play against grammar schools and other private schools as well. It's not just, they're not within a bubble. So it's not limited, just because you go to a grammar school that you'll never interact with a private school student and vice versa. They do offer excellent music and drama programs, and they have STEM clubs and academic societies. They will develop into well-rounded young adults, right? So there's no worry in that.
That's exactly what we want to see. And
Yeah,
it's really great to hear that these grammar school opportunities are available because especially at EPA, Exam Bytes Academy, we definitely believe that every child deserves a chance at success, no matter what your socioeconomic background.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's really amazing whether that's through gaining scholarships to private schools or gaining entrance to these really great grammar schools that are extremely affordable and don't charge any tuition. There's always a place for a child to find success and achieve their dreams. And I think that's really great. Speaking of, getting into these grammar schools, you've seen a lot of parents try. What do people not know about the application process that you wish they did?
There's a whole list of that. But just of the main things is I parents do need to check what type of exam their child is going to take at the school. They need to know if it's CEM or GL, even though they don't need to specifically prepare, for one particular subject. It's best to prepare for all of them. The child needs to know what they're going into when they take the exam. If they're going in blind, they will be flustered, right? Secondly, some schools have catchment areas, so you have to make sure you're within that catchment area in order to be prioritized. So it might be an X number of kilometers away from the school or a certain postcode. And finally, it's really, really important you register correctly through the right channels. Some schools accept registrations directly. Some schools, however, accept registrations through the local authority. So you need to make sure that you're registering correctly because you can't just turn up on the day and expect to get an exam. And finally, really, really important, sorry. If you miss the exam for whatever reason, because your child is ill, please do not worry. Call up the school. They can arrange an additional day for your child to take the exam. They're not just going to say, that's it, you don't have a chance. So call them up if your child is poorly on the day so that you can get a supplemental day.
Wow, that's a really, really great tip. Definitely don't lose hope in this process. I know all of these deadlines and all of this information can be really overwhelming, but it's really great that, it doesn't stop there. If you miss an exam, if your child happens to be sick that day, if there might be exams overlapping on each other, there's always supplementary days to kind of like look into. And I want to touch on the couple of points that you made as well about knowing which exam type your child is taking and knowing about the catchment areas. How can parents do research on that? Is that Googling? Is that looking on the school website?
Google is a fantastic resource. The school website is usually better, right? The school website or the local authorities website, depending on where you register, that's where you'll find that information.
Can you walk us through, um, on the flip side, common mistakes that you see people making for grammar schools and what you would recommend against?
So I think I mentioned those things about not knowing catchment areas and missing registration deadlines. But I think the most common one I see is underpreparing. It's really, really common to see children be underprepared and stressed because they may have memorized things but not understood the content well enough for them to take the exam. So please, please don't underprepare. Make sure you're giving your child adequate preparation as well as adequate support on understanding the theory.
That's super important. Again, we're kind of as we're recording this podcast, it's the end of December. This is now the time to really, really crack down on preparation, really invest into ensuring that your child has the best chance of success and is definitely hitting those 80 to 90% success goals by June. So Definitely second that. Before we kind of wrap up, for the parents listening, this is a lot of information. Do you have a sort of final checklist you recommend for parents to ensure that they are prepared for this process?
Attend open days. Make sure you go to all of them. They are free. Register for the 11 plus exams within the deadline through the right channels. Use a spreadsheet to stay organized and begin preparation early. So that's late year four if you're in year four right now, and definitely year five. And right now, of course, if you're in year five, start now. I know it's the Christmas holidays, but doing a little goes a long way.
Thank you so much. Kind of piggybacking on that, Exam Bytes Academy is trying to make it easier for your demotivated students during the holiday season. We have some free resources that will also link in the bio and description below, especially our holiday-themed maths paper and our holiday-themed English paper. We are also launching new free resources to make sure that every parent and every child has the opportunity to succeed through this process. So check out the rest of the videos on our YouTube page. We just launched a free nonverbal series walking through the fundamentals and the theories needed to really help your child succeed there. So we hope you have a look. Definitely comment any questions you have. We will answer them in future podcast episodes. And thank you again for your support and joining us in this episode. We'll see you next week.